Welcome back to the Provisionist Perspective. I'm Drew.
And I'm Eric.
Let's try that again. Welcome back to the Provisionist Perspective, where we don't make up ad hoc categories to unfalsify our views, and only the truth matters. We're really excited for today's episode, and we're really thankful that we now have 81 subscribers as of the time recording this, which is really cool, and I think really unexpected. Looking forward to more. I'm Drew.
And I'm Eric.
And Eric's going to tell you about what we're talking about today because neither of us are experts on it, but he's a little bit more well-read than I am. So
I am definitely, let's please premise this, I am definitely not an expert on this topic, but I think it's an important one. I think it's one that's not going anywhere, and we need to start talking about it here. So what better way to talk about it than on the internet? Right, Drew?
Absolutely. Yep.
It always goes well.
Where lots of rational, reasonable dialogue occurs on a daily basis.
When I think of the internet, I think rational, reasonable dialogue.
Yep, especially on YouTube.
That's right. Today we're going to be talking about critical race theory and the church. Maybe you've never even heard of that term before, but perhaps you've heard the term social justice. Perhaps you've heard intersectionality, identity politics. There are several things that this is called, but it has its basis in critical theory, and it is also called critical race theory. That CRT is becoming the term that a lot of people are using for this, and we're going to talk about that today. Mainly what I want to do is say, I'm not an expert on this at all. I also want to premise this by saying that this isn't political. I'm not being political about this. I want to look at this from a worldview perspective. Is critical race theory compatible with a Christian worldview? What are its worldview claims, and then comparing those to the Christian worldview? The political stuff is important, but that comes later. First, we have to look at the philosophy behind it, the worldview behind it. I also want to say that I am riding on the coattails. So, okay. I got interested in this subject because, long story short, I saw all these kinds of things that were going on. And it seemed crazy to me. I was trying to understand it. But I was very uncomfortable with how a lot of people addressed it. I'm talking about the anti-ERLC guys. So you have your what's the ERLC stand for again? I don't even remember.
It's the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, I think.
Okay.
And it's specifically associated with the Southern Baptist Convention again, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But the ERLC isn't the only one. There's lots of other churches who are taking a look at, are valuing the ideas of critical race theory and trying to bring them into the church as a point of compassion and a way that we should interact with each other. And so there are people who are pushing back against this. And there seems to be, in my view, a knee-jerk response to all this. That it's a response that's too extreme, that is too dismissive of why people find CRT so attractive, why it's gaining so much traction in our culture and even in the evangelical church. They're too dismissive, and if you're dismissive, you can't actually address the issue. You're not going to convince anyone if you're dismissive. And so a lot of the Reformed guys, Founders Ministry, the Discernment guys, Reformation Charlotte, Pulpit and Pen, these people who are responding in this way, I think are responding wrongly. And so I was looking for someone that I think balanced this well. And so I want to be upfront that I am not an expert at all, that I'm taking this, we're going to look at this from a worldview perspective, not from a political perspective. And I'm riding on the coattails here of Dr. Neil Shenby. And we'll have his stuff in the description below. But this is presentations of his. I've watched interviews of his, and I've watched articles of his that I have read, and they have just been the best balanced approach to this. And so if you want to know kind of where I'm coming from here, it's Neil Shenvi, and you can look at his stuff in more depth, and we'll have that stuff below. So the first thing I want to say is this. I want to premise this, start here. The world is not how it ought to be. Does that sound right?
Yep, perfect. And I think that that seems like, as far as a Christian worldview, would be something that we could all intuitively get behind. The whole "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We've
which
spoken
means His will isn't being done on earth. And
exactly,
it's a prayer
exactly.
that we wish. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And without getting into that again, obviously, that's kind of the whole making up new categories of secret will of God versus revealed will of God,
right.
is unhelpful. We're perfectly comfortable with saying the world is not how it ought to be, and God's will is not always accomplished on earth.
And so if you take that and you say, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, I would say that on earth doesn't mean just in the church. Earth doesn't mean just in our lives. The earth means in political systems, in cultures, in how people are treated by their governments, and how people are treated by other people. How all of this is all the interconnected parts of what makes a complicated society like our own, that we want to see His will done out there too. And so this is one of those things where we can easily acknowledge that racism is real, right?
Yep.
That people treat other people badly on the basis of their skin. And I don't want to downplay that at all. I don't want to spend too much time on it, because otherwise this episode will be incredibly long. But I don't want to downplay it at all. It is a horrible thing. The racism is a sin, and we should be able to, even if somebody thinks that we're virtue signaling, even if somebody is going to come up and think that we're supporting critical race theory or something like that, we should still be able to, from the pulpit with our Christian friends on our YouTube channels, condemn the sin of racism and say that this is a lie from the pit of hell, that people are not inferior on the basis of their skin. They should not be judged on the basis of their skin. It's one of the reasons I reject critical race theory, because I think it does judge people on the basis of their skin color. I think that a knee-jerk response, a non-balanced response to critical race theory, will judge people on the basis of their skin color. And I think that is all sinful. I think that is all bad. And we shouldn't do it. Nobody should do it. It is sin. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, and obviously the reason why we're doing this is, I think that whether people know it or not, and as I've been looking into this a little bit, we watched the same video sort of in preparation for this, and I've read a handful of articles and seen some videos and stuff. It is, I grew up going to school in what I would consider to be a pretty diverse community. And I think it's interesting how a lot of this thinking and rhetoric and stuff is kind of like out there, and I think needs to be addressed, and that we can simultaneously critique what appears to be critical race theory in terms of its proposes a solution to an issue that we also want to recognize, which is, as Christians especially, that racism is a sin, and this needs to be repented of and dealt with in all of its various aspects. So,
right, and I think there's because critical race theory, and we'll go over this, makes these erroneous claims about the past and about how things work. I think the easy thing is to say, well, none of that's happening. Well, that's not true. The best lies have a half truth. So it is true that racism exists now and is going on now. And I think in a smaller way that critical race theory thinks it's happening, but that there are still racist systems, that there are places where racism is supported. And we can get into some of that stuff at a later time. But I think we can still acknowledge and agree, even as someone who is politically conservative, somebody who is concerned with critical race theory and its effects in the church, I can agree that there are microcosm, small structures where racism is supported. And these are things that we should talk about and call it out, even when it makes us uncomfortable, even when we think it might throw the critical race theorists a bone. Who cares? It's sinful. We have to call it out.
Yeah.
So racism is real. Those power structures do exist. Another thing I want to say too is that I also think that the justice system is broken. I do. I believe the justice system has a lot of corruption in it, that there are parts of it that are structurally broken. And I would encourage you to go watch a video by David Wood. I believe he has his PhD. Dr. David Wood, is that? Do you know who he is?
I think he does have a PhD in philosophy.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. David Wood. He has this video where I think the video is called, and we'll link it below. The video is called "Why Some People Hate the Cops," something like that. And he spends.
I think I saw that one. Yeah.
Okay, so he spends a good amount of time explaining, as a white dude, he's a white dude who grew up in some poor neighborhoods and made some bad decisions, experiences he had with cops and corrections officers. He spent some time in prison. And these experiences he had where there are, I'll just say it in 2 sentences, and then you can go watch his 45-minute explanation if you don't believe me. But there are police officers, corrections officers, who use their power to abuse people. I think we can agree on that, that there are people who, in any walk of life, are drawn to places of authority, including being pastors, that allow them to abuse people. And we've seen that. Priests, pastors, cops, judges. We've seen it, right? Politicians. Okay. I have the utmost respect for what police officers do. I think they have the hardest job in the world, and it's not close. I have the utmost respect for what they do. But there is a structure in place in the justice system, in police departments, in a lot of places, where it is very difficult, if not impossible, to hold these abusive cops accountable. And so what ends up happening is you have these people in these communities who have bad experiences. And even if you say, let's say that those cops are 5% of the police force, 10%, it's probably less than 10%, 5% of the police force. It doesn't matter when you have a terrible experience with a police officer where they make you feel powerless. They have all the power. They can do anything to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you have this experience, and you tell all of your friends, you tell your family, who tells their friends, who tells their family. And this happens 100 times over the course of a year or so. However, these things have memory. These things travel. These experiences travel. So even if the vast majority of their experiences with cops are positive, even if the vast majority of people who live in these neighborhoods with high crime want the cops around, and they do, surveys say they do, it still means that there are bad experiences with police officers, that this colors how people feel about police officers, and that there are cops out there who use their power to abuse people. And this because we need to protect our police officers, because we do need to protect them, because they have the hardest job in the world, that structure gives room for these bad police officers. Also, the other things that I think we can also agree on is that things like justice and compassion and are good things. That even though we may distill it down and say, okay, critical race theory sees these things wrongly, we can still say that justice and compassion are good. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think Well, and the whole "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven" is essentially a plea for justice, is a plea for righteousness to
Amen.
reign on
Amen.
earth. And there's lots of, maybe we'll get into this, but I don't think that there's in question that now. I think that some Christians are a little out of touch with the poorer, lower socioeconomic communities and stuff, and so it's not that they don't care, but that it's not a real reality for them. But I think we can all agree that we want to see justice done. We don't that oppression, which I'm sure that we'll get into a bit in discussing this,
Yeah.
is an objectively bad thing. That we want to bring healing and restoration to all those different areas. So
And yeah, that as much as we can, as whatever we're called to do, whatever it is within our sphere of influence. If there's something unjust going on, or there's an opportunity to have compassion on someone, I think we can agree those are good things. And insofar that we become aware of that stuff that's around us, maybe we can't do anything about what's going on in other places. But if we become more aware of what's going on around us, that would be a good thing. And I think you're right that as Christians, we tend to get into our little bubbles where everyone acts nice around each other and everyone's kind of doing okay. And we don't know what to do with it if something actually unjust happens. We don't know what to do with it if somebody starts actually suffering. So if this makes us have more of a conversation about how our churches can be aware of the unjust and the lowly in their communities, or what's going on that is unjust in their communities and the lowly in their communities, that would be a good thing. I think we could agree on that too.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so and here are my two main concerns. We're going to get into critical race theory as a worldview, and we're going to compare it to the Christian worldview here. Here are my main concerns, though, and why I want to talk about this. And I poked and prodded and cajoled Drew into talking about this.
Yeah, no, we like it. Controversy, man, bring it on. Yeah.
Let's open this can of worms. Is that this is not going to go anywhere. This isn't leaving. This is here to stay. And I'm old enough. We can look at the grays in my hair. Gray. That's the other side. Gray. I'm old enough to remember when the great homosexual debate was happening in California, Prop 8, there's all this thing happening in California. And I remember that so many people were dismissive of the concerns of the homosexual community, that they were dismissive of their argument and they were dismissive of the force of the argument. And so they didn't really engage with it. They didn't engage with it in a balanced way. They just said, nope, that's never happening. That's lame. That's dumb. It's not marriage, whatever. And of course that's true, but they didn't engage it in this balanced way. And all that happened is that their argument won. The homosexual argument won, and now no one ever, like, basically it's over. That's kind of, that ship has sailed, right? It's legal. It's never going anywhere. They've won the heart of the culture. This is that. It's not going anywhere. And if we don't address this in an educated and balanced and fair-minded way, their argument will carry the day, and they will win. 2, if we don't address this in a fair and balanced way, and Neil Shenby right now is being dragged for not being militant enough, for not going so far in the opposite direction by these people. What's going to happen is that on the Christian side, on the conservative Christian side, what's going to happen is that the people who are going to carry the argument and carry the torch of the argument for us are going to be people who pave the way for a white identity response. So you've heard of Robert DiAngelo's White Fragility, that book?
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. If you want, because I don't think that white identity response, because I'm sort of in this, I can interpret that. But what does that,
Okay,
what does
white
that look
identity
like?
response. Okay, let me describe white fragility and this. So the basic argument with white fragility is that white people don't want to talk about racial issues because it's a threat to their power, and we're going to get into what they mean by power. It's a threat to their power. They don't want to talk about it. And so if you disagree with someone telling you that you exist in a racist structure, that you contribute to a racist structure, that you in that sense are racist, even if you've never done anything racist, even if you've never been mean to anyone, but you are white and so you're contributing to this white supremacist racist structure. And if you say you're not, that's just evidence of your white fragility. If you walk away in a huff, that's evidence of your white fragility. If you say, wait a minute, I think you're generalizing, and let's get specific here, that's evidence of your white fragility. So what she's basically doing is she's telling all white people that there's really nothing you can do. You're racist and you're fragile. And even if you acknowledge that, you're acknowledging your white fragility. You have it because you're acknowledging it. So the response would be, the knee-jerk opposite response, this is what I mean by white identity, would be, okay, so if you're saying that no matter what I do, that I'm a racist, cool, then I'm going to be a racist. You think I'm a racist? Then I'm a racist. And there's going to be this, I'm going to ban, so if you think that we are all, if you are going to group us all under this identity as white people, then I'm going to take on that identity as a white person. I'm going to relate to my fellow white people. And we're going to get together and we're going to figure out a way to push back against this kind of thing. I think that's sinful. I think that's bad. I don't have anything in common with other white people. Do you?
No.
I,
Well,
I don't see white people as like a class.
sure.
I don't see another white
Yeah, I
person
think,
and go, brother. Well, yeah, I don't
and
do that.
yeah, in fact, it's interesting you bring that up because the schools that I went to growing up were predominantly black. Because I went to school, I was, lived in the suburbs and then took the bus into the school in the city. So I grew up with this kind of like, uh, I'm supposed to identify as white people, but what does that even mean to me? So there is an interesting, I think, even cultural solidarity among different groups like Black Americans and Hispanics and so on that they quite identify. But I'm not sure white people have that. I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't know.
think
I'm
so.
not an expert, but I don't really sense any kind of camaraderie
Me either.
with
Me either. But I can see how it goes there, because if this keeps getting pushed and keeps getting pushed, we need to have a balanced response, or the knee jerk. If we don't have an educated balanced response and we don't see exactly what they're saying and how they're saying it and and what they're doing, and have a way to talk about it, the reaction for the people in our churches, the reaction from the people that are our neighbors, the people we live around, everything like that, the people who will become aware of this stuff is going to be like, there's nothing I can do, fine. Then I'm not going to even try racial reconciliation. I'm not even going to try to relate to those who look differently than me. I'm just going to stick with my own. And that further divides us, that further makes it so we don't have anything in common. And I think that pushing white people to have more in common with people who look like them is just bad all around. That never goes well. Let's not do that, please. So that's why I want to have these conversations in a balanced way, so that the other knee-jerk response doesn't carry the day.
And for clarity, I guess when you say, if we're not responding to this properly, in an imbalanced way, there's going to be an extreme reaction on this end. You're not saying that like a majority of white people are just going to get triggered and become racists all of a sudden. You're saying that in the same way that there's extreme views on this side that's going to sort of push out.
I don't know.
Is it or
I don't know. I think that critical race theory is going to create a bunch of racists on both sides. Yes,
because I
that's
guess
one
the
of my
point of
concerns. Yes.
because I guess the point of critical race theory is the whole categorizing thing into different races and classes, whether it's heterosexual, homosexual, and so on, different things. And so because this pushes this kind of sections, that the inevitable result of that would be that it pushes white people, so to speak, into this fine.
And nothing good comes from that. Nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing good comes from that. And so, okay, so let's get into it, right? Let's get into let's compare the worldviews here, and let's get into exactly what is critical race theory saying, and what are the kind of the structure of the worldview here. Again, I'm not an expert on it. If you want a detailed analysis, please go watch Dr. Neil Shenvi explain these things. He does such a great job explaining where this came from. But basically, the idea behind critical theory is it does come from Carl. You may have heard the term cultural Marxism. Some people calling this that. I think Vodi Bacham calls this cultural Marxism. Yeah. You may have heard of that.
He has some great messages and stuff on it as well. I listened to a couple of them recently. So
he does. He does some great stuff on it. He really does. That's true. So cultural Marxism, where that comes from is that Marx envisioned a class warfare where the lower classes would rise up against and I can always get these confused. You can tell I'm not an expert. I get these confused. One's the proletariat, and one is what's the other one? Do you know?
Is it the bourgeois thing?
Yeah,
something
that they'll rise against it because the workers are being oppressed, and those that have the money and who own all the property and all that are using them, and so then the proletariat will rise up. That didn't happen. It never happened. And so then there was this, I don't have these dates and all this things memorized, but there was this Frankfurt School where these philosophers took Marx's ideas and said, okay, let's look at everything in this way, look at everything through this lens of power. So there are always, they see everything through the lens of power. There are always those who have the power and those who don't have the power. There's always an oppressor and the oppressed. And then they sectioned these off into identity groups, and they create a hierarchy. Now, they would probably deny there's a hierarchy, but there is a hierarchy. And that there are oppressed groups. And at the top, you have old, straight white men. And then it goes from there. You have all your different intersections. And of all these things are connected, and you could be a part of several different sections at a time. And so you could be part of the oppressor group if you're a white person, but if you're a woman, perhaps you're also oppressed at the same time because of your status as a woman. So they see every human interaction, every human structure that has ever existed in history as between those who have the power, those who don't, but those who are oppressed, the oppressors and the oppressed. How am I doing so far?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that like when you were talking about the hierarchy, they probably wouldn't say the word hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy in the sense that from what I understand, again, not an expert, just have listened and learned to a few things. It's so power up here. And so it's a hierarchy of descending, I guess, amount of power and influence that you have. And so in that sense, it's a...
I don't know.
What do you think?
No, not in that sense. It's a hierarchy of oppression. So the only
that's what I mean. Is power equals oppression, right? Those who are in power oppress.
Right. And so those who are in power, who are just straight white males, they are oppressing everyone else. Right. And depending on your intersection, you might be more oppressed.
More or less oppressed.
More or less oppressed.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how they see everything. That's critical theory, and so then everything has has spawned out of that idea. And so there is a never-ending expansion of the ways that this critical theory gets applied and all of these critical theories. And so race is one of them, gender is one of them, sexuality is one of them. And so you'll see all of this of queer theory, even in Christian circles. You'll see homosexual studies and feminism studies, and you'll see all of this in the Christian realm as well. And so when this gets down into the Christian area, what happens is that they view the Bible through this oppressor and oppressed. And so you read the Bible through the lens of who is the oppressed person who is speaking, and let's give him more value. So here's the other thing that they say. There's another part of the worldview that comes from that. So if you are the oppressor, then your view of reality is skewed because of your status as the oppressor. So if you say, this is how you may have seen this online where they go, 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4, right?
Yeah, that was a recent thing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Completely crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll say in mathematics, right? You go, okay, well, mathematics, this is, how could critical race theory, the oppressed and the oppressor, how does that get to do with mathematics? Well, mathematics came out of white Western culture. And so this
is that really like a thing?
Let me be clear. Let me be fair and balanced.
Okay.
They wouldn't say that 2 + 2 never equals 4. They wouldn't say 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. They would just say it doesn't always. So that everything.
Yeah.
If you are part of the oppressed class, everything you've come up with in the history of the Western world, mathematics included, is tainted by racism, classism, oppression. It is tainted by it. And so what we need to do to combat this is we need to value minority, indigenous people voices. And so if those voices didn't come up with these ideas of objective truth and 2 + 2 always equals 4 and all this kind of things, maybe we need to rethink, we need to check our privilege, we need to check our oppression, we need to rethink how did the people that the European colonialism was oppressing, how did they view the world? Did they have all this math and engineering, and were they doing all of this? No. So to them, what did 2 + 2 = 4 mean? To them, what does objective truth and logic and all of these things mean? It just meant that they had to work for the oppressor, that they were oppressed. So we need to rethink all of these things. Even 2 + 2 = 4. So I want to be clear that they're not saying that truth is relative. They're just saying that the oppressors can't see what is the truth, and that the oppressed have better access to seeing reality for what it really is. And then once you see reality for what it is, right? Once you get woke, once you see that the power structures in place and that there's oppressors and the oppressed and that it's all about power, and once you sort of see that, then your eyes are open and you're able to see reality for what it is, the Western world for what it is, all these structures for what it is. How's that?
Yeah. And I think, again, kind of circling back around to what we said, we're recognizing that oppression exists and that we should have our eyes open to it and that we shouldn't be blind to it and that racism is real, but that we're not like trying to shirk, oh, there's no such thing as this. And I think to your point about the white identity thing, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I've heard some responses to the whole Black Lives Matter movement and these different issues that are coming up from Christian brothers, usually Christian brothers, white Christian brothers
Mm-hmm.
say that there's no such thing as race, and that's not like a biblical category. And I'm like,
So then what you
I feel like this is an overreaction.
so that's
I feel
exactly
like
what
maybe that's
I'm talking about. That if we don't, that they're punting because they don't understand critical race theory. They don't understand what's going on here because all of this is being thrown at them all at once, and they haven't been able to sift through it. There aren't these, trusted, robust answers to this. There aren't people. Tim Keller's wrote some good stuff on this. Vody has some good stuff on this, but a lot of people, a lot of popular evangelical organizations are embracing it. Because all this is being thrown at them all at once, they just go, that's it. Race doesn't exist. That seems like a nice answer.
and it's
And
so interesting.
and that's going to pave the way for racism.
And
If
it's
you
so interesting too, because to me, what that has communicated without necessarily having the vocabulary to describe it is white fragility. So it's like, you've pushed this thing. No, there's no such thing as race. The Bible says it doesn't recognize that there's such a thing as race. We're all one human race, and that's Adam. It's like, you're just being fragile, bro. Like, you're just not dealing with and I can see how that would be kind of
right,
mutually and reinforcing and then
right,
polarizing, like,
right.
um, unhelpful. But
We're gonna return to that. What I want to finish out the thought of. Okay, so let's compare this then to the Christian worldview. And I think the main question we would have to ask ourselves is this: how do we know what's true as Christians, as thinking people?
what is our epistemology?
What is our epistemology? How do we know things are true? And reason, logic, exegesis. And so if you say that what matters more is your oppressed status, that everything a white male says, doesn't matter how good the exegesis, doesn't matter how good the logic, the reason, the evidence, whatever, but everything a white male says is the white male attempting to keep their power over others. And so we can just safely dismiss everything they say. This is directly opposed to the Christian worldview, which says there is a truth out there that we can discover, that God has revealed himself to us. And he had people write this down, and we can know it, and people can teach it to us, and we can study it, and we can know the truth. Critical race theory says, no, you have to pay attention to who is saying it, to the identity, the racial makeup, the sexual orientation. You have to pay attention to who is saying it, and then they tell you what the truth is. They tell you what it means to them. This a very technical term in critical race theory called lived experience. So this is lived experience. That you have to pay attention to their lived experience. And they're here to tell you. So what this does, and I wanted to put this in religious terms because this is what it is. It's directly opposed to how we see things in an orderly universe as Christians, reason, logic, exegesis, all of that, how we know things are true. It also flies in the face. It also creates a priesthood. It creates a priestly class of people who tell you what the truth is and tell you what it is, how you can talk. White Fragility, the whole book is about her recommendations for how to get along in this new world of racial reconciliation, of anti-racism, which is another term that, how to get along in this world is you ask people of color in your vicinity how you should say things. You create a priestly caste of people who tell you the truth and how you ought to practice your Christianity, how you ought to interact with the world, how you ought to do anything.
And it's interesting too because to maybe give a little bit of pushback here, I think that there is a tremendous amount of value in diversifying your perspective in terms of the pursuit of the truth, because we do have our own lived experiences that are limited but at the same time, we're trying to affirm that we can discover truth together, and that there is an objective truth out there that we can discern, and that while, in terms of compassion and empathy and reconciliation and unity, that we can be having conversations about, saying things in a particular way while acknowledging that there's truth and that there's no sort of class backing behind your own truth claims, which is interesting that we're doing this episode, because ultimately none of what we have to say about this matters at all, because we're both white heterosexual
Completely.
men.
No, and that's why one reason that I think critical race theory is so dangerous, especially in the church, is that it makes relationship impossible. It makes reconciliation and coming alongside and saying, because the Christian story is that we're all sinners, right? So, okay, let's go through this. This is definitely one of the main points, right? What is the Christian story? Okay, the Christian story is there was creation, God created everything. There was the fall where we sinned, and whatever your view of Adam and headship and all that, there was a fall and we all sinned. And then there is redemption, where Jesus comes and saves us from our sins and redeems our fallen states, and we have communion with him and all that. And then there is restoration, that one day we all will be restored to God, and we'll have communion with God, with Jesus, through our faith, all that. That is the Christian story. Critical race theory has a completely different story. They don't talk about creation at all. That there is no identity marker for human beings as made in the image of God. We don't share anything in common on critical race theory as human beings collectively. There's two different people, the oppressed and the oppressors. That's it. There is no shared narrative of creation where we're all sort of human beings together. That's completely absent from their worldview. That's horrible. I think that's awful.
Yeah.
So there's no sense of shared identity. Their fall is original racism, basically. That racism is the biggest sin, and it's only white people who commit it. Only white people in power commit racism. So bigotry, racism, oppression, these are the original sins, and they are the absolutely worst things on the planet. There's nothing worse than these things. That's their fall, and it's completely different from the Christian idea that we've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, and we all are in need of redemption. This says no, only certain people, the ones in power, have fallen. And for repentance, for white people, there's no repentance. There's nothing you can do. For everyone else, there's activism. So, okay, white people can activate. White people can be activists, but it never gets them out of the oppressor status. They're always going to be oppressors.
Right.
But
by virtue of your
repent.
skin color.
Yes.
Right. Well, but by virtue of your skin color, it would seem that, and one thing that Brother Neil Shenvi talks about is this one tweet about how, 10 things or something. And then it was like, you're white. If you're white, you will always be racist. Just accept it. So in that sense, there seems to be no repentance, even if that's such a strange thing to me and so disempowering, right? Like let's say I'm convicted in my heart as being a racist and that I've been discriminatory and prejudicial. So there's no repentance for me. I'm just supposed to accept that this is part of my identity. And then what do you do with that? How do you, and that's not redemptive. That's not, and that disables in a different way people from taking personal responsibility for their actions. Like
that's you're describing all the ways
strange.
in which it's totally opposed to the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
That there is only activism. All you can do is do the right things in the right way. It's performative. You're basic. What you're doing is you're setting up. If a church near you, if you are a pastor, if you are an elder, and you're listening to this, if you adopt these ideas, then what you are doing is you are setting up. You're placing your people and your church and anyone who you have influence over. You are placing them back into a system of temple sacrifice, where the only thing they can do is stuff they can do. Is activism, is saying the right words and doing the right things in a social action sense. But again, it never absolves them of their racism. It never absolves them of their oppression. There is no reconciliation, but they can do this, and it's the only thing that they can do.
You might even say, if we want to use a theological or soteriological buzz phrase, it devolves the gospel-centered, trusting in the mercy of Christ, good news into work in these areas.
Yes.
And indefinitely.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And so then the Christian worldview is there's a restoration to come. That in the next world, we are all reconciled together as the family of God, and there's this restoration and reconciliation with God. On critical race theory, their heaven is on earth, and that comes in the form of a truly equitable social justice society. Whatever that looks like, whoever enforces it, whatever the utopian version of it is, their heaven is on earth. There isn't.
So if they could... So I have a question for you in terms of your studies on this with regards to the critical race restoration, so that we're kind of clear on this. If they could wave a magic wand and things were a particular way, what do you think that would look like to them? Like, how would they transform? How would they bring that heaven to earth?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
We're going to outsource to Brother Neil on this one.
Well, I think one
tweets.
thing that Neil does say, that Dr. Shenby does say, is that they're very pragmatic. And that's a really nice way of putting it. He's very being very nice when he says...
He's very charitable.
Very charitable when he says pragmatic. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't use that word. I would say that they are double-tongued, that they'll say one thing and they'll mean another. They'll say one thing out of the side of their mouth and say another thing out of the side of their mouth. I would say that what they would say would be equity. They would use the word equality, but they would mean equity. And they would say everyone is equal. But if you try to drill that down, what that would really mean is not a single white person in any place of power whatsoever. Every single white person has been displaced, and there's never another white president ever. And all of that, because you've got to, it's not, once you go with even, once you have in your mind that it has to be even, then there is no even. You never get even. That never happens. Because on their view, all of history has been white people oppressing people of color. So what is that, 1,000 years? So we need to have 1,000 years of black presidents before we can have another white president? Like, what is equality, right?
Because you would have to, I guess, in theory, shift in the other direction or something. I don't know. Yeah.
So if you're paying attention, though, what you will hear them say is that it needs to be completely upended. Everything needs to be turned on its head. Everything. Burn it all down, tear it all apart, put it all upside down, all of it. And so if you're talking about the Black Lives Matter organization, they're like, nuclear family, see ya. We oppose a nuclear family. Heteronormativity meaning that it's normal that people are straight. Nope, upend that. Just the idea that being normal, being straight is the normal, that's oppressive to queer people and to homosexuals. That is oppressive to them. So we need to change that completely. It needs to be totally on its head, and that queer needs to be the new normal. So it is a total upending of the capitalism too. Get rid of capitalism completely. Get it out. Not a nuanced here the dangers of capitalism. I think we can agree there's some dangers of capitalism,
Right.
especially for people's souls and their well-beings and stuff. But no, nothing like that. Just boop, socialism completely, communism. So they would say equality, but what they mean is flip it,
Sure.
and that's heaven on earth, and that's completely opposed to the Christian view, which is that this place that we're looking for something greater. There is something outside of ourselves, something that we can't do. So there's this sort of hope and this trust in Christ and in God that we have to have, because this world isn't the way it's supposed to be, and there's some things we can do, but we can't make it all right. And so we have this hope in the life to come. None of that exists on critical race theory. Completely opposed worldview, which says heaven can be here on earth if you just give the right people the political power, if you just listen to the right people's lived experiences, if you just perform the right activist behavior. Heaven can be here on earth, and it's utopia.
And maybe you'll get into this. I don't want to interrupt your flow of thought here, but
you're being really generous. This has been a flow of thought. I appreciate that. That's very generous.
No, yeah. I've asked questions and kind of diverged us from
that's
the outline and stuff that we have here. But what was I going to say? So I feel like the struggle for me in all of this is that, we started all of this off with thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so for the Christian, there is a certain measure in which you resonate with this. Let's bring heaven to earth. Let's create justice and righteousness here. And so I think that's the confusing bit, in terms of like, well, this seems like it makes sense. We want equity and we want justice and stuff. There's kind of a buzz phrase out there about Jesus even being all about the upside down kingdom. Blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, and so on and so forth. So I think it's definitely tricky. I think navigating
I
this.
agree with you that if we don't acknowledge that there are places of hegemonic power, meaning, this is how it's been done. There are this group of people that tell you how reality is, and they hold this power over you. Yeah, I think there are places of hegemonic power.
The scriptures say, it talks about how the whole world, 1 John 5:19 says the whole world lies and wickedness, or some will say underneath the sway of the evil one. And so there is a system that has influence and power here that is corrupt and evil.
I totally agree with you. And I think whenever you see places where people get a bunch of power, there's corruption. There's people are wronged. There's injustice that happens. And I think on for my people, my conservative people, that's why I don't understand sometimes what I see as a blank check for police, that the police and the justice system get this sort of blank check of benefit of the doubt. And I'm like, right. But this is like the ultimate power structure, and we should be vigilant watchdogs over this power structure. These people can come into your house and take you away. Shouldn't we constantly be checking their power and constantly checking on them? Why aren't we? So yeah, we need to be doing that. But where I would say for you, though, is that what you'd have to understand about the critical race theorists is that they don't think they're sinful, though.
Sure.
Once you're woke, once you get it, then and if you are doing the right activities, then anything else is permitted. So if you can create, just imagine this. If you truly believe in your heart that you can create heaven on earth, and you can end all suffering and you can end all oppression by just doing the right actions and saying the right things, then you become, the ends justify the means. Anything goes in this ultimate good goal of having social justice, utopia on earth. And so that is why you see the rioters, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. We can at a later time get into exactly how well those people are representing those groups, but that's why they are justified in firebombing cop cars and trying to burn down police precincts. It's okay to burn down police precincts because you're stamping out oppression. That's a moral good thing. And if somebody gets in your way, well, you're doing the right thing. You're creating social justice. This gives you're not being sinful. You're the righteous when you're doing the right thing. And I think so this gets into one of the things that I want to say about why I think that critical race theory is bad, is because it's bad for people. It's not healthy for people to absorb these ideas. Can you imagine? Okay. Outside of the extreme examples of, somebody somehow justifying violence in the pursuit of social justice. Okay, just that's sort of extreme, and okay, this one I think is a little bit more relatable. Can you imagine if you are a black person in your church and you are being told from the pulpit, from the media, from all of your cultural sources, that every single one of your white friends is oppressing you, and that they're all in some way have power over you? Do you have any friends anymore? How lonely are you?
And one of the significant things that is part of the whole New Testament launching into the nations narrative, as well as some really awesome experiences that I've had, is the unity that we experience in the Spirit and in the gospel with those of different colors and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds and stuff. And then as soon as that's a bunker buster in terms of it getting inside you, and then all of a sudden, I could definitely see how that would be difficult to have conversations.
Yeah, because
to love one another, and
right, everything is a power game. There is no unity in that worldview, in that mindset. There is no unity. You're going to make friends with your captors. I mean, it makes it impossible, and it can't. It's terrible for your soul, terrible for your heart. Like, how do you live life? How do you live life believing that there is this overall hegemonic structure that is pressing you down, and won't let you be happy, won't let you have the relationships you want to have, won't let you get where you want to get. And it's this nameless, faceless power that is always on your back. I can't imagine what that would be like to think that is happening all the time. And then it's pastors who are telling their congregants that essentially there's no hope in reconciliation. There's no unity in the church, that every interaction is about power. I mean,
And what do you think, with regards to white people? I don't want to necessarily divide this into how different people adopting this would affect them personally and their communities and stuff. But I guess I'm also thinking so that's kind of what would happen from the Black American perspective. And then what about, if let's say I adopt critical race theory,
sure.
What happens?
You are going to be constantly terrified that you can't be friends with anyone who doesn't look like you, because you might offend them at the drop of a hat. At the drop of a hat, they might call you a racist. They might call you big because this thing that you said, you didn't even realize you said it, but you said this cultural appropriation thing, or you said this culturally insensitive thing, and you're walking on eggshells, and you have to treat everyone around you who doesn't look like you, like kind of like a wee babe, that you might hurt them at any moment. And, oh, what do I say? What do I do? And, oh, you're just this constant anxiety that you're going to, oh, oh no. And so there's no unity there. Or you have to constantly apologize. You have to constantly say that you're sorry. And that you, I didn't mean to. I didn't know that I was a part of the structure. And oh my gosh, your life is so, and that's how it is all the time. And how stressful is that? How alienating is that? That you're all against each other all the time.
And then how do you, I know we have an outline here, but I guess I'm just thinking,
Let's do it.
Our listeners are going to be even more perhaps uninitiated in all of this stuff. And so how do we balance that in terms of, because we want to approach things with compassion, with sensitivity, with cultural understanding. I don't know, like, offense is a real thing. And we, I can think of occasions in which I've heard like really racist things, and it's just not even like, registered or whatever to me. And that there's probably a lot of that could be or is subconscious. And then how do you, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Does that make any sense to you?
No, we can't respond to this dismissively. We can't respond to this by saying, when the request is made that you have to, that, someone who adheres to critical race theory, talks about their lived experience and basically makes the ask, right? Makes the request that you have to believe them and you have to behave in a certain way because of their lived experience. The response to that can't be lived experiences don't matter. Of course they matter. Of course they matter. Of course you ought to listen. Of course you ought to listen with compassion and hear their experiences that are different than yours. And there are, back to Dr. Wood, who had that video about the bad behavior of police. I've never been pulled over by police because they profiled me and I fit the profile of the guy that they're looking for, but it actually wasn't me. That must feel terrible. That must feel awful because of the way I look. You pulled me over, or worse, they pull you out of the car. You spend a night in jail. They figure out, oh, it's not you. You just look like the guy. That's got to feel terrible. And that's not even to take into account what if that cop treats you badly or needs you in the stomach or put your face in the ground and they weren't even looking for you. I don't know what that's like. I never lived in those neighborhoods. I grew up with two parents in a white. I don't understand what that's like. And I saw racism from afar. I saw I saw that going on at school, and my dad spent pretty much his whole teaching career in Paramount, which is right next to South Central LA, and so I saw racism in terms of I knew from his stories and from the things he told me that the black kids and the Mexican kids didn't get along, and in fact that there were race riots on their campus. I heard about these things. I heard about gang violence. I saw my dad weep for a student of his that was killed for his radio. This was back in the 90s when you would take your radio out of your car. And he took his radio out of his car, went into McDonald's, and a guy asked him for it, told him no, shot him dead right there in that McDonald's. The McDonald's was right across the school. So my dad cried for this. So I've seen these things, but that's not my experience. So I ought to listen. I ought to listen to people who are telling me about these things.
because I think the temptation, you've talked about sort of this polarized reaction on this side, and I think that my discontent with uh, with the conservative side of things, I think does the thing that I value about them is that it's like facts don't care about your feelings. I think
Yeah.
that's a Ben Shapiro thing.
Yeah.
And as an ENTP kind of logically thinking type guy, I'm like, I don't really care how you feel. What's true? Let's talk about the truth. And so, but then I think that you were talking about this like, oh, I don't want to offend,
Yeah. Yeah.
in saying that's not how we ought to operate. There's also this danger of saying, who cares who you offend as long as you speak the truth,
Yeah,
you
you,
know?
you, you, you go around with double middle fingers in the air, and
Right.
everyone hates your guts, and you're just like, I'm just telling them the truth. It's like, no, you're a jerk.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
you're being a
Yeah.
jerk. You're being a jerk to people. I I
Yeah.
I, I think there is a danger there. I think the bigger danger, though, is that it separates us from each other, and so you never actually. It is very difficult to sit in front of somebody and have them tell you the bad things that have happened to them in their lives, and for you to go,
Mm.
But what's really easy, a lot easier, is to never listen in the first place. Is to go,
Mm.
well, if I even try, I'm going to be accused of being a racist. And so I'm not even going to listen. I'm going to stay in my bubble. I'm going to stay in my conservative facts don't care about your feelings bubble. I'm going to curate my social media feed so I never see any opposing opinions whatsoever. And anything that even sounds like critical race theory, I'm going to scream cultural Marxism and run in the other direction. I think that is the easier thing, and it's just as dangerous. I think that if people were placed in front of other people and actually had to listen and actually had to hear the stories of the lynchings that only really happened, I guess, a generation ago, that
Mm.
the violence that happened towards black people because of the color of their skin, stuff that was not a part of the stories of, I grew up in Southern California, so you don't really have that stuff there. But in the South, that
Mm.
stuff exists, and those stories exist, and it wasn't all that long ago. So segregation, the integration of schools was what, 60 years ago?
Yep, my parents were, coming up in the Southeast around that time and stuff. So,
Yeah,
uh,
that's not that long
what,
ago, guys.
56 and 58,
Yeah.
both my parents were born. So,
So if
uh,
you sit down, you actually listen to these people and their stories, and that is, it's harder to dismiss them when you actually sit and listen. But I think that people are going to see all this, be inundated with all this, and just disengage, just not care,
mm,
and stay in their own bubbles. And then you never understand anyone outside of your bubbles, and that leads to animosity, that leads to misunderstanding, distrust, and eventually violence, I think. And so we have to keep listening and keep talking about these things. And that's that's one of the reasons why I think CRT is so dangerous, is because it shuts down all the dialogue. It shuts down
mm,
dialogue. It is these things are happening, therefore you have to believe me and behave in this way. It doesn't
yeah.
stop
And
at
people
it doesn't
and
stop at
people
these
like
things
you
are
and
happening.
I, right, right, yeah. And people like you and I don't have a voice, don't have a we're not allowed to speak to those issues because of the kind of lived experience thing that you said. And I admit, I think that for me, I do value unique perspectives because I realize that my own lived experience is one-sided and stuff. And so I think there is a nobility in sort of, hey, I want to hear, what you have to say about this. You
Sure.
have your own perspective on this and stuff. Um, but then it's when you elevate certain perspectives as more true or more valid than others because of who
But
is saying
so
them and stuff.
can
That's
you imagine though? you're going to end, if this goes unchecked, and if we don't find compassionate but firm ways of talking about this and dealing with this, the unity in a church is going to be impossible unless you all look like each other. You're not going to have diverse and unified churches. That's impossible if the congregation adopts critical race theory, because you're going to just constantly have, if you absorb the worldview that everything is about power, you're not going to have unity in church anymore. All you're going to have is power struggles. You're just going to be constantly having power struggles on the basis of intersectionality, who's intersection, who's on top, who had enough representation, and representation is another word they use a lot. That's all it's going to be. It's going to be this power dance all the time. That's not a church. That's not unity. People are going to get exhausted, and then they're going to leave, and they're going to be, I think, just so dangerous. They're just going to gravitate towards places where everyone looks like them. Because then they don't have to play the game, they don't have to do the dance. Mm-hmm. And then where are we as a church? And then where are we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you adopt these things, we have to look at it in terms of syncretism. That it is another worldview, another religion that is being brought into the church. And we have to discuss it from that perspective, while at the same time listening and being compassionate and hearing where people are coming from and asking ourselves, why are they compelled by the ideas of critical race theory? Why are they compelled by these ideas? Ask yourself those questions, ask them those types of questions, and hear what they have to say. And we have to stand on the gospel, we have to stand on biblical principles and say, no, there's ways that we discover the truth. There's a Christian story. Right. There's a Christian story. We have to stand on the Christian story. We have to stand on the gospel that we're all sinners in need of a savior. Every single one of us equally have sinned. There isn't a priestly caste of people who can tell us who is more of a sinner than another person. Tell me all about what is going on with you and how we as a church can help you and how you can contribute to us. Tell us how you can contribute to us. We're not just here to help you, you're here to help us, but we have to stand on these things or we're not the church anymore. It's not Christianity if these ideas are adopted. So that's what I've got. We can kind of end it there unless anything else you want to say or questions or...
I don't know. I think that's good. I think I would recommend that people, we'll have the link to Brother Neil's talk underneath, as maybe Eric has an article or something that I think it's been really interesting. It's a prayer point. I think that I was talking to a friend, a student earlier today, in terms of discerning the truth amidst lots of different competing ideas in an information world and stuff. And by the grace of God, we have the Holy Spirit that leads us into all truth, and we can ask him to help us discern while standing firm on biblical principles and the gospel and stuff, and hopefully just continue to speak the truth in love to these issues and in humility, listen. Maybe we're completely off. Maybe there's people out there that just really vehemently disagree with me. I can think of a number of people that I'll probably just send this episode to and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Give us some pushback.
Yeah.
We like that. That's the goal, right? Is
exactly.
To have conversation
exactly.
and to talk about what's going on and stuff. And so,
and that's all I want to do is just start a dialogue on this, start talking about this. It is, I really do see it the same way, as if all of a sudden there was this movement within the evangelical church to adopt some tenets of Mormonism or adopt some, it is that big of a deal, and it is coming from the culture at large. And this is here to stay. This conversation is here to stay. This issue is here to stay. It's coming to a church near you. It really is. You think your area is immune wherever you are? I don't think so. If anybody
Yeah,
has the internet where you are, these ideas are being promulgated
yeah.
very
And it's
forcefully.
not it's not an American problem either.
No.
I live in New Zealand, and I think that this is we have minority groups here like the Maori people and stuff, and so there's this is equally is applicable wherever you are. One thing that I think I would like to say, and we'll put the link in this in the bottom as well, is there's a sermon the other day from a guy who talks about social change and social justice and stuff, and how the instrument that we have that's transformative in all of this is the gospel. We've talked about how the gospel is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, and that's the transformative. We've talked about how this is, there's sin issues and corruption issues and stuff, and so
Yeah.
we don't want to be like, well, we just need to preach the gospel, and that's it. There are activities that we can engage with, and activism, as Christians, that we should be doing and helping the poor and stuff, or serving our communities in that.
Yeah.
But that long-term transformation from the inside out is only going to occur for people that are knowing and loving and following Jesus. So
Yeah. I
to
think that
kind of
if
get to
we
kind of
were,
end us on an empowering note here,
sure.
that there is things that we can.
There are things that we can do. And I think the church, this is why I'm so passionate about this issue, is because I think the church is uniquely placed to where it can make so much difference in social issues in its own communities. Local churches have so much influence in their communities, and this is we're the ones that can actually do good things. If anybody can be activists, it's Christians, because we are, and I mean that in the sense of doing good things. I don't mean activists in the sense of the political way it's been used, been taken over,
Sure.
but that
Just use those words to trigger you a little bit.
yeah, we're gonna trigger lots of people, but there are good activities we can do, and we shouldn't shy away from doing them just because people who are also doing those things have ideas we disagree with. We shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, "Oh,
Right.
we're just going to disconnect from our communities and disconnect from you put our blinders on to the bad things that are going on around us, the bad things government is doing around us." We should talk more to our local governments and be on the side of people who are actually being railroaded by the police or the justice system, or be there for those people. I think those are things that we should actually do as we partner with our cities to do good things. So they know that we're on their side. We know that we're doing good things in their city. And then if something bad something bad happens that the police do or something like that, and then we're there supporting that person, they don't think that we're against them. Or like, there's ways that we can do this stuff and not have to buy into all of the big overarching worldview here, and also
Right.
not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So, right, I definitely agree. It's not we just preach the gospel and close our eyes and ears to everything else. Hear no evil, see no
Yeah.
evil. No, not.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do any of that at all, and that's definitely not what I'm saying. But just that these ideas, this worldview is incompatible with Christian unity, incompatible with the Christian worldview, and this just starts the dialogue. We'll keep talking about this. I would love to do episodes where we kind of go over some of these things we find in the church or in the culture, and just try to find out, okay, which is which.
Where can we find agreement? Where do we disagree?
Right. Where's the justice? Let's find where the justice is on both sides, and see if we can't ride this line of justice, because we care about that, right? We love mercy. We love justice. Let's ride this line where we have actual justice and not social justice and all that baggage that it means. And yeah, we'll keep talking about this. And if this is content that you like, if this is content you want to keep seeing, then give us a thumbs up, and leave us a comment.
Or give us a thumbs up anyways.
Just even if you don't like it, just give us a thumbs up.
Give us a
Subscribe, leave us a comment, come visit us on Facebook or anything like on those platforms there. We'd love to talk with you, continue the dialoguing with these things in a balanced way, try to find what that balanced way is. We'd love to keep having that conversation. So that's all for us here on the Provisionist Perspective, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.